Warning. This video contains spoilers for DC Universe's Doom Patrol. Viewer discretion is advised. DC Universe is out and I paid for a year of it. This is DC Discussion. Readers, this episode of Doom Patrol, and I think rightfully so, is called Therapy Control. And while it doesn't necessarily move the plot along, it does a lot of things that I personally enjoy seeing as far as exploring the headspace of different characters. Also, the use of Mr. Nobody in this episode, just like, what? Like, I'm absolutely sure that I would get the use of certain actions and characters in this episode if I read the comics. But just looking at this episode as a guy whose only current exposure to the Doom Patrol is this series, I am absolutely gobsmacked. So let's jump into it. So if I were to give a summary of this episode, I would have to say that it's a mix of Reservoir Dogs and the last two episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion. I say Reservoir Dogs because the majority of this episode plays out the same way it did in regards to us seeing everyone's personal actions over the course of the day before they all intersect into one moment. And it's the last two episodes of the original Evangelion anime because the subject of the episode and how it plays out is showing us some very nice introspection from everyone in Doom Manor. And speaking of Tarantino, the episode starts off with a time jump at the end of the day, where Cliff is trying to convince everyone on the team to talk about the grievances that Mr. Nobody is trying to use against them after what they experienced from the original Doom Patrol in the last episode, so that they can stand a chance of not having what was done to the previous team done to them. And I'm just gonna keep it real with you guys. This is the smartest thing that Cliff has done in this season so far. Like, yes, he did stand up for Vic when Silas was being a shit in the last episode, but that was more of a reaction than a conscious decision. And I'm not trying to downplay that at all, mind you. That was just as important to his character as the actions in this episode. But when we get further into this episode and we see the other ridiculousness that plays out, the fact that he was able to make that conscious decision holds a hell of a lot more merit in my opinion. So with that being said, let's start off with Rita's point of view. We see that ever since the events of the Doom Patrol episode, and rightfully so mind you, Rita's mantra in order to quote-unquote keep herself together isn't necessarily working like it used to. This gives us an interesting introspective on how she sees herself, especially since we've gotten bits and pieces about what Mr. Nobody is torturing her over in episodes 2 and 6. There's also the fact that because said stuff is attached to her stage name, Rita is having a bit of an identity crisis, which factors into why she's having a hard time staying solid lately. Then there's Larry, who has the most Shinji-ass revelation about himself out of all of them thanks to the negative spirit inside of him. I say that because the spirit is literally forcing him to relive a memory he has of his lover the day before the accident. He's constantly trying to fight it, but he just keeps being put back in it until he comes to a very important realization.
You want to know why I couldn't be with John? You want to know what's missing from this fantasy? Fucking context! Wow. You have no idea how long I waited to hear those words.
Now, out of all the ways that the spirit has tried to get Larry to heal and work with him, this is actually my favorite one. Like, yes, the spirit still has that fuck you, I do what I want mentality, especially when it comes to getting Larry to cooperate. But this is done in a way where the brashness is subtle, yet still annoying enough for Larry to want to re-examine himself in order to understand and come to terms with things. Soon, it's Vic's turn. And can I just say that I appreciate how normal his reflection is? You know, as normal as a cyborg teenager can get. Which is funny because that's the entire realization of his segment in this episode. Because now that his software is absolutely free of his dad's meddling, he finds out that he had the DC equivalent of a Tinder account back when he was completely human. So while waiting for the rest of the gang to get up for a meeting he planned, he goes through all the profiles that are just fangirling because they know him as Cyborg, up until he finds one who's genuinely interested in him. You know, until she finds out that he's a cyborg. So, despite the social media jab, I really dig this deconstructive Cyborg in this episode. It shows that despite wanting to be the hero that he wants to be versus the hero that his dad wants to be, there's also a desire deep down inside him to just be a normal guy again. Yet, despite said desire, there are just things about him that are different now. He can never truly go back to that again and has to make the best out of the situation that he was handed in front of him. And I think using Tinder to get that point across was a pretty nice touch. Then we have Jane, who we don't get as much introspective as I'd like, but I do find out something interesting about her during her segment that confirms my overall feelings about her characters. Anyway. Rightfully so, Jane's alter Hammerhead is a bit sore at the Chief after finding out that he had a room reserved for her in the quote-unquote retirement home for the original Doom Patrol. So sore that despite Main Jane's attempts and pleas for her to stop, Hammerhead goes on an emotional tirade and destroys nearly all of her taped sessions with the Chief. And it's after seeing the way these scenes played out, while also taking into consideration all of the development and focus that Jane had in the previous episodes, I finally realized that it's not Jane that I hate. It's Hammerhead. She's the most emotional, she's the most volatile. Every action and decision that was made over the course of the season that I had a problem with was made by Hammerhead, while Jane and the other alters have been reasonable and understanding. Which sucks, because from what I've seen, Hammerhead is like the main enforcer out of all the alters that Jane has. She's like a more disorderly version of Patricia from Splitting Glass. Also, from what it looks like in said scene, Jane may be losing control of Hammerhead, which I am not looking forward to that episode. No, not at all. Nope, not I, said the cow. And then there's Cliff. And holy shit. So as I expected, Cliff going through his daughter's social media page in the last episode doesn't turn out that well. Because he finds out that, I guess, his best friend became his daughter's guardian after he and his wife were indecapitated. Too soon? So coupled with his recent realization that he can't taste or feel anything, that he's just a brain in a jar basically, he snaps and travels to a trailer park where he thinks he's confronting his best friend about his daughter. But in actuality, all he did was walk outside, is fighting Cyborg, quickly gets snapped out of it, and immediately gets into the fetal position and proceeds to have a breakdown. So yes, readers, the smartest thing that Cliff has ever suggested the group do was brought on by a mental break. Yet while the team eventually does decide to share, confide, and talk to each other, Cliff's still an anxious and neurotic mess. He's like this up until Hammerhead is being antagonistic again and threatens to leave because of the confrontation between her and Cliff, where he has another mental breakdown afterwards, and his body just completely shuts down after he's pinned to the ground by Cyborg and Negative Man. And that's where we find out that the real cause for Cliff's recent episodes was a rat inside his fucking body. But not just any rat, mind you. A rat that was influenced by Mr. Nobody to sabotage Cliff's hardware after witnessing him run over his rat mother in episode 1 in the bus when the gang went on the field trip to Hollywood Backlot Town, USA. What the fuck? So now you understand why I said what I said about this being the smartest decision Cliff has ever made, right? Because despite having a fucking rat named Admiral Whiskers in his system clawing away at his brain, he still had the conscious effort to realize that one of the best ways to fight Mr. Nobody was to take away his most lethal ammunition he had against him, and that definitely deserves props here. It's also possible that Cliff's gonna be incapacitated for at least the first half of the next episode, if not the entire episode. I say that because since Niles isn't around, and because he did say in the previous episode that he would have built Cliff a better body, Vic is probably going to take him to see Silas's punk ass to get an upgrade, and that's probably going to be the B plot. Then again, considering the trailer that I just watched for episode 8, I clearly don't know what the fuck to expect next. So with that being said, readers, your homework assignment for the day. Write in the comments section below what you thought of Doom Patrol episode 7 if you've seen it. If you want to help financially support the channel, you can join my Patreon by clicking the card at the end of the video or in the link in the description down below, where you can also find a link to my merchandise store. Or if you prefer to give a one-time donation, you can find links to my PayPal and my Ko-fi account in the description box as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. But until then, this is Readus 101. Class dismissed.